thanks everybody for hanging out with us today. I'm really excited for this conversation, which probably just kind of tells you a little bit about my background. You know, the old XP, getting excited about talking numbers in the midst of a crisis. But I'm really excited to be able to have some time to spend with Chris Willard and Glenn Wood and Daryl Rowland today. And we're going to spend a little bit of our time talking through the financial realities of the COVID-19 church. And so joining me today is Chris Willard. Chris is a senior generosity strategist with Generis. He's also the director of generosity initiatives at Leadership Network and co-authored a book called Contagious Generosity. And Chris also served for years as the executive pastor at Discovery Church, where he also is now one of the elders. And so he has lived both sides of this and is currently living this with his church as an elder. Glenn Wood is joining us as well. He's the pastor of church administration for Seacoast Church, and he's been there for 25 years, so he's just getting started. I hope that works out, Glenn.
But he's got a lot of potential. He's got a lot of potential.
Definitely got some potential. So he oversees administration, the legal stuff, construction, campus renovations, and pretty much it just sounds like you do everything that nobody else wants to do, huh, Glenn? So,
you know, I've said this as job security, as I've talked to conferences, is, you know what, I have phenomenal job security because I've been doing this for 25 years. And in 25 years, I've never had somebody come up to me in the church and go, you know what, I want your job. And so I figure I got job security as long as I want to stay because nobody else is dumb enough to actually want to take on all this roles.
There you go.
Nice. So now, Glenn, you also do work with the church network, and you kind of oversee a handful of groups that work, you know, churches of over 2,000 weekly attendance. So you're hearing a good bit of things from not just what's going on at Seacoast, but all over the place.
Yeah, you know, I've been involved with church network for about 20 years, and work with what they call their Metro network, which are churches of 2,000 and up, and just have got a great group of connections across the country. Just talking with them and dealing with it, because one of the things that I found is that no matter what size you are, if you're a church of 2,000 or you're a church of 20,000, is we all deal with the same stuff. Now, how we deal with it, how we actually handle it may be slightly different based on size, but we're either going into a crisis or we're coming out of a crisis. And I think one of the things that we as people that sit in this role need to do is support the big C church and support people across the country. And if I can share what's going on that's been good with another church that's dealing with a crisis, then you know what, I think that's part of what we have to do.
That's cool. Thank you for that. So last but not least is Daryl Rowland. So Daryl is an executive pastor and has been an executive pastor doing both ministry and operation work for about 15 years now. So this might stick for him as well. Currently, he's the executive pastor of operations at Rockbridge Community Church, which is large multi-site church with sites in Northwest Georgia and also the Tennessee Valley. So, and Daryl's also recently joined the chemistry team. He's one of our church coaches, and he helps churches find great staff members, but he also helps them navigate challenging seasons. So, Daryl, thanks for joining us as well. And then I probably have to introduce Todd. Todd and I are co-founders of Chemistry Staffing, and we're just excited to be able to have these conversations with you guys. So thank you all for being here. To answer the question up front that a lot of people will ask us, this is being recorded. We will send this out to anybody that's registered for this. And if you haven't registered yet, you can go to chemistrystaffing.com/virtual and sign up for that right now. But let's dive in. So here's my question for you guys, and we'll just take this as a conversation and see where it leads. This is a new season. This is something that they didn't teach us about in seminary. So what are you guys seeing in the churches that you're working with, and how are you seeing them kind of navigate the financial realities of this situation?
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about this. I'm kidding. It's funny, Matt. I think one of the things that's getting revealed during this crisis is is how well a church if a church has had a solid strategy for teaching and preaching generosity and stewardship and giving and putting it in its proper context, they're weathering this crisis in a much different way than churches that perhaps have not been doing that as thoughtfully or intentionally. And one of the things that's interesting that I've discovered is that sometimes a church doesn't have a really solid strategy for generosity and stewardship and giving. And the reason is because they don't feel like they need one, meaning the income's fine, like giving is fine. Todd and I served for years with Leadership Network, and one of the things that Bob Buford, one of our mentors, used to say is that the hardest model to change is the one that works. So sometimes what's being revealed right now is that some churches have not built a solid strategy for generosity and stewardship and giving, and that's being uncovered. And the reason they didn't build it is because they didn't feel like they needed to, because giving was fine. But of course, that was never the right reason to build it in the first place. So that's one of the things that I'm seeing is that churches that have really thought about this over time are weathering this in a way different way than others that are having to scramble and make it up as they go along. And I don't know what you guys are seeing, if that's something similar.
Yeah. And I would agree. And Chris, to your point there, one of the things I'm seeing is if a church has a giving base that's a mix of different groups of givers and not just all high capacity or all low, it really seems to be stabilizing them as well. They've been able to survive this. I think also those that have embraced technology more in the past is certainly they have a leg up. I feel like the church overall has been resistant to the societal shift of relationship through technology.
Yeah.
And I've heard many people say they have stronger relationships with people that they have met or have small groups with through Zoom or some other platform because they're more open and more relatable to them there. So I think now we're seeing that lack of engagement in that show up, get magnified. But those that have already taken those steps in the past now have a little better footing and are starting to embrace it and grow it more.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, you were talking about, embracing technology and all, and I think that's exactly right. Even on the giving side of, having the ability to give to your church through technology, whether it's through an app or through giving or through a text to give, I know there are a number of churches that are having to scramble and are trying to set that up or have been trying to find vendors to get that set up over the last couple of months. And, I think you're exactly right. I think those that have embraced technology are faring this better. Plus, I also, I think there's just a shift in the way people are giving. And, as I said, I've been doing this for 25 years. And, I remember when we first started doing, be able to give online, that just was a really strange thing. And, what about putting a kiosk in the church? And, people aren't going to stand in front of a kiosk and, type in their information. And yet they did. Well, people aren't going to give via text, and yet they do.
Yeah.
And so, I think we as the church have got to adapt and continue to adapt with the changing technology. And, there's going to be something else, though, the text to give, there'll be something that at some point will replace text to give. I think we as the church have got to continue to embrace that. While I think it's scary for some churches that, our older, generations aren't going to, do text to give or online giving. Honestly, in a number of cases, we've seen our older generation be some of the first ones that have adopted it and bought into it and signed up for it. So again, I think we as the church have got to look at this, step back, look at it broadly, and look and see where technology is going and embrace it and move forward with it.
Yeah. It occurs to me too that when we do that, Glenn, we have to be, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that we don't want to so affirm online giving that we discount the way other people do choose to give. So for example, what I'm suggesting as I'm talking with churches and clients that I serve is, as you talk about online giving, be careful to affirm the fact that some people actually prefer to give their gift when they show up for worship.
Yeah.
Like the truth is that if you're a person that likes to bring your offering with you when you come to worship, you're joining a 5,000-year-old tradition of the people of God physically bringing their offering with them when they come for worship. That's great. What I want to hear pastors saying, if that's your preference, if that's how you like to give, that's great. We actually affirm that. However, as you know, in these days, that's not possible. And so here are some other options for you. I think that language is helpful because I think some people, and it's not an age thing, I think some people just like to bring their offering with them when they come to worship, and that's okay. In fact, it's great. We want to affirm that.
Absolutely. I now Seacoast actually has not passed what you would say past the traditional plate. We probably haven't passed the plate for 15 years. And we put offering boxes, and we've got offering boxes throughout the campuses and in sanctuaries. And it was like, I remember the week that Greg said, "Hey, we're not going to pass a plate this weekend, and here's what we're going to do." And as a staff, we went, especially me, because as the finance guy, went, "Oh, this may not end well for us." But again, people. Actually the first week that we did that, our giving went up 20%, and the next week it went up again, and we thought, this is really cool. So again, it's just sometimes thinking differently and then embracing it and moving forward.
Yeah, and I think, Chris, I appreciate you saying that, of acknowledging those who like to bring it in. And I think that we can categorize people generationally and assume that they cannot embrace technology. They're embracing it for their grandkids, great-grandkids, so they're already there in many cases. Yet, there are those that want to bring it in. So one of the things that I've been encouraging churches to do is to send out a letter to those, identify who are your cash and check givers, send them out a letter, validating that their desire to come in and give, their gift of giving, and affirm that that is a gift, as well as tell them stories of how that's impacting. We're doing that through all communications, but include an envelope. I had the conversation inside with my staff. Well, if we mail it, that's 50 cents. If you include another envelope, the stamp, that's 50. You're talking 3. We're going to spend this much times how many thousand? But the first week of us doing it, and when we do it every 3 weeks, we had it was over half our offering came in through check that week. It was just amazing the way people responded to that and appreciated the fact that we honored that time of offering and gathering together and creating places they can drop it off.
Yeah.
As well as including how to sign up online. Our online giving reoccurring shot up after that too.
Yeah, it costs money to process every contribution.
Yeah.
Right. So sending people an envelope especially in this crazy season that we're in right now, I think is a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
And some people will use it, and it's almost like a passive encouragement. Oh yeah, I've been meaning to give. I haven't gone online and figured that out. And then they turn around, and you're facilitating what they actually want to do.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this though, and I'm going to point this question to you, Chris. First of all, I mean, literally, we have on the webinar today the person that actually literally wrote the book on church generosity. But I was just looking up, Chris. So, Contagious Generosity. If you haven't read it, everybody needs to get that book. But that came out in 2012. So it's been almost 8 years. So you've seen a lot, and your life's work, both at Leadership Network and at Generis, has been kind of fostering this movement of generosity in churches. My question to you, though, is, I mean, this is an unprecedented time. How should we be talking about giving at the same time that we have a lot of people in our churches that are really hurting, a lot of people that are losing their jobs, a lot of people that are just, quite frankly, uncertain about the future? How does that change the conversation about giving and about generosity
Well,
in our churches.
thanks, Todd, for that overly generous comment about me.
It's all true.
But hey, here's what I'll say. Here's what I've got a couple thoughts on this, as you might imagine.
Yeah,
Here's
that's
what
what
we
I
don't
asked.
want to do. One of the things we don't want to do is we don't want to make this about, hey, because of this crisis, the church really needs you to give.
Right.
That message is going to be very tone deaf out there for people in your congregation whose income has just been shattered.
Yeah.
Who can't go to work. And these are not just blue collar folks too. Some of your consultants, independent contractors, small business owners, they've got no income. So you talking about how the church needs their giving is going to be a mess.
Yeah.
So my encouragement is, this is a great opportunity to talk about giving the way we should normally always talk about giving. Meaning, let's think about this. Acts 2:42 verses Acts 2 verses 42 to 47 has always been a passage that we use to describe the work of the church, right? They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. The passage continues with, they saw miracles. They saw God add to their number. And then what else does it say at the very end of that chapter? And they gave generously. And so what I'm encouraging churches to think about is, talk about this in context. Hey, gang, we're still the church. We're still the church. So what does that mean? Well, that means we've provided ways for you to continue to worship and to pray and to be in fellowship with one another. You know what? We're still trusting God for miracles. We're still trusting God for people coming to faith in Jesus. And you know what else we've done? We've created ways for you to continue to give, because that's the work of the church. Remember, in Acts chapter 2, they did all of those things without a building.
Yeah.
So my encouragement is, in this moment, to talk about giving the way we always should talk about giving, as one of the things that God calls us to do as a part of the church. It's not because the church, we don't talk about giving because of what we want from people. We talk about giving because of what we want for them. And I think this is testing that in churches. So that's the way I'm sort of encouraging churches to think about it. I don't know what you guys are. I'm sure that's the very thing that you're doing in your churches.
Yeah. I would say yes. And, we're talking mission. What is the mission of the church? And we're telling stories through visuals. People need to see people in action and all right now more than ever, because they're feeling isolated. So we're just talking about mission more than we're talking about money. And then we're also talking about being stronger together. We've started this community type campaign of Stronger Together, and it is forcing people to engage their churches online. We're asking them to do that. We created a community relief fund. So think about your community more than you're thinking about yourself there, and really tell those stories of how it's impacting and moving the mission forward.
I think you're exactly right. I think one of the things that the church has got to continue to do is just talk about the stories, talk about life change, talk about how the church is impacting people's lives. Talk about marriages that have been restored. Talk about food banks that you're supporting, or work that you're doing in the community. We have an Adopt a Block program on our North Charleston campus, the Dream Center. Throughout all this, it's actually the one campus that has continued to stay open because they do a food pantry, because of the outreach that they have in the community. And the church, we've got to do even a better job of capturing these stories, talking about these stories, and not just necessarily having, the pastor stand up and say, hey, here's what we're doing, getting people from the community in the church, talking about how the church impacted their lives, how the ministry of the Adopt a Block or the food pantry or the, fill in the blank, helping people, get jobs, or, whatever it is, just the mission and the ministry of the church. We've got to capture those stories and tell the stories. I think and sometimes we go, well, hey, we used that story 6 months ago. Well, maybe, but that's still a valid story. Maybe we need to provide an update to the story. Maybe we need to tweak the story. Maybe we need to, take that same person and pair them with somebody else who has a similar one, and maybe sit down and interview both of them. But I think part of the job of the church is telling the stories of why is the church here. The church is not here just to say, hey, we need your money. No, the church is here to advance the kingdom, to impact lives, all the things we've talked about. But we've got to do a better job of telling the story, which, getting your video teams, whether those are people that are, whether they're paid staff or whether they're just volunteer people that are in your church that have a passion for doing it, get them involved, let them serve. That may be how they need to serve the kingdom, and have them help capture the stories, edit the stories, put the stories together, and then push them out. Again, whether that's part of a weekend message, or whether that's just a post on Facebook or Instagram or whatever platform you want to use. Again, I think we need to try and push these out, because I think one of the other things is we put that we put it on Facebook or we put it on Instagram, and we think, well, if they, because a lot of times we as church leaders, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on, whatever the current, social platform that's out there. And not everyone in our church has a Facebook account and an Instagram account and a TikTok account and whatever. And so I think we need to make sure that we're cross posting these things, because the same post will reach a totally different market based on whatever social platform you're going to post it on.
Yeah, it's good. There's another thought too, if I could, Todd, to follow up that question. I think there's another thing that I'm encouraging churches to think about. You got to watch your language, right? Whenever you talk about things, you got to watch your language, because words matter. Words create worlds. And one of the temptations I think that pastors are having right now, and I think it comes from a good place, is to say something to people like, hey, listen, if your financial situation has changed and you need to change your giving, we get it. Like, Now, the heart behind that is really a good one, isn't it? It's a pastor who kind of cares about his people. By the way, I'm seeing this in particular in churches that are in the middle of a giving initiative, a capital campaign, or something like that. And while I find that that impulse is positive, I really would recommend that pastors not use language like that, and rather perhaps say something like, listen, that here at, for example, my church, Discovery Church, that here at Discovery Church, all we've ever wanted you to do is pray and ask the Lord, what is it that you want me to give? Yeah. And then to say yes to what it is that God calls you to give. And you know what, friends? During these weird weeks that we're in right now with this COVID crisis, that's not changed. Here's what we're asking you to do. Pray and ask the Lord, what is it that you want me to give? And then give it. That permits somebody, if they need to change their giving, but it doesn't invite them to. It doesn't suggest that they should or necessarily even need to. And I think that kind of language can kind of get in the way, even though it comes from a good place.
Yeah. And Chris, I think it can become dishonoring to some people who have the gift of giving. We want to honor and respect them if we're not careful with it. Right. And I think we're talking about a lot of the negative impacts. Some of the positive of this that I see is that we talk about the church being a living organism, and actually, more often than not, we're a gathering organization. This is going to force us to inspire others to be living individuals and organisms outside the walls, I believe.
That's good.
Chris, I think you hit on something that's really important, just the fact that the language that we use matters. I kind of want to shift, if we can, away from this conversation on giving, but I think this is really important, and talk a little bit, how are you guys having those conversations using intentional language about, budget realities, or what the numbers look like? How are you having those conversations with staffs? How are you having those conversations with congregations? What are some, Chris, what are some of the ways that you would advise churches to be able to have those conversations as you guys are really kind of navigating an uncertain uncertain period for us.
Yeah, and I'm going to defer to Glenn and Daryl on this question more because they're currently leading as executive pastors and really having to make this decision for their own church. But one of the things, Matt, that I'm encouraging churches to think about is to try not to make any declarations about what you're going to do long term.
Yeah.
Because with all due respect, we don't know what we're doing long term.
Right.
So up until recently, right, when this whole PPP loan and some of this stuff was taking place, what I was recommending that churches say is, listen, maybe you can tell your staff that, listen, for the next 2 or 3 weeks, we feel confident that we can we're still going to be able to cover your salary. And then we're going to reevaluate on April 1st. This was some number of weeks ago. That's honest.
Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't give your staff member false hope that the church has got me covered sort of indefinitely.
Yeah.
Now, with regard to this new, if a church has applied for one of these paycheck protection grants or loans, that's going to require that you keep your staff kind of stable for whatever it is, that 8 weeks or 10 weeks. That's a different story, but that's one of the things I'm recommending is let's not make any declarations of what we will do long-term because we honestly don't know. Yeah. Right. And I'm sure that you guys are wrestling with that and having to actually figure out, okay, for now, I think we know what we're doing, but we may need to make some changes as time goes on. Right.
Yep, absolutely, Chris. And I believe those conversations are important to be truthful and honest. We talk through, hey, we have a good reserve built up that should carry us for a few months here. So just want everybody to have a sense of, peace or at least a comfort in this time. And I've been talking to our directional elders that we won't know really what it looks like for another 8 to 12 weeks. We're seeing trends. We're seeing people come to the table and really help us out, but they also are business people and they don't know what the future holds for them. What I've been saying is to pastors and churches and our team, don't cut today what will cost you tomorrow. Mm-hmm. Because that's that knee-jerk reaction. Well, what can we cut? I think you really need to look strategically at what you're doing from a mission perspective. Make sure that mission is there regardless. And then begin thinking that also, hey, my team is part of my mission, caring for them. So that's kind of the approach that I've been recommending to church. Think of mission first and really not to have any knee-jerk reaction. Don't cut today what's going to cost you tomorrow.
That's really smart.
And Daryl, I think you're absolutely right. I think part of what Seacoast has done and our leaders have done a great job of navigating this, and it all starts with communications. So Josh Surratt, who is our lead pastor, usually 2-3 times a week, we are on the Microsoft Teams platform. So usually 2-3 times a week, he'll put out just a little short video in the morning of here's what's going on, here's what we're doing, and again, just trying to communicate to the staff that, yes, we are no longer meeting in the building. So obviously that's a change, and we're having to adapt how we do ministry. And in fact, actually right before this call, we had a Teams call of how are we going to minister to the congregation, online, whatever platform that is, and trying to just do some communications on that side. But from the expense side and the money side of it is you just talk to your team. And again, I'm going to talk more internally than externally focused for the moment, of just reassuring the staff that, as Daryl said, we do have a good solid cash reserve. We've had a good solid financial model that the church has had for a number of years, and it is built for a time as this, so that we can weather these type of storms, for lack of a better term. And you just communicate what's going on. Talk about the here and now. As Daryl said, we're not making edicts for the next 6 months or 12 months. We're talking about, hey, for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, here's our plan moving forward. If you don't have to spend money, then don't spend money. We've done things like, obviously travel is off the table, but even like resources. If you don't, now if you need to buy some resources because, you know, it's being used as part of an ongoing ministry, that's great. But if you're talking about buying books just to read some books during this time, that's not the direction that we're going to encourage you to go. So, you know, try and not spend the money that you don't have to. And what money that does get spent is, as Daryl said, mission related and strategic. So we've got to make sure that we're doing that and just communicating what's going on. And you know, just talking with them day in, day out, or at least once or twice a week. Here's where we are. Here's what we're doing. You know, from a giving standpoint, this is what we're seeing. You know, for the local church. You know, one of the things, with the interaction with the church network and some of the other ones is trying to get a picture of what's happening nationally. You know, because I think sometimes the local church thinks, well, we're the only people that's having this kind of an impact, and we're the only ones that the giving is down or giving is flat or whatever it is. And the reality is, we're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
Now, how we set up and how, you know, the job that we've done to, you know, to get us ready for this season, you know, is showing up in terms of maybe the decline in giving may be worse for some churches than others. But again, we're all in this boat together. We're all trying to figure out how to navigate it. And again, I think just being honest and being forthright of, here's what we're doing, here are the steps we're taking for the next 2 weeks, and we're going to reevaluate it. You know, from a staffing standpoint, you know, now I think we're in week, 4, 5, they all run together at this point. I think it's 4 or 5 not in the building. And so we said, okay, here's the plan for the next 30 days. Here's our plan from a payroll standpoint. And we're going to reevaluate that at the end. And so we're starting to look at those and have some conversations about what makes the most sense. You know, do we think we're going to be out of the building for another 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks? So again, just trying to have some conversations, and let's just make decisions for this week or the next 2 weeks, and not make some categorical, well, here's the plan for the next 60 days, 90 days. We're just not looking that far down the road.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, Glenn and Daryl in particular. Sorry, Chris. Just from a staffing perspective, because you know we are chemistry staffing. I'm curious, as you guys are looking at this short term and even maybe medium term reality, how are you guys redeploying your staff? You know, not being in the Sunday morning, in the building on Sunday morning kind of changes some of the requirements, and some of the people that were full on, hands-on, neck deep in Sunday morning production or Sunday morning work. How are you redeploying those teammates, and how do you have those conversations with them right now to kind of point them in a different direction?
I'll jump in and start with this one. I think I was actually talking with my boss yesterday. We were talking about this, and just, I think one of the things that in this reality is job titles at this point in time don't really matter. I mean, just because I'm director of this or that doesn't mean that, I can't serve other areas. And, we've had an online presence for a number of years, and that's been managed by, we have an online campus pastor and a team of and again, I don't know the exact number, I'll just say 5, just to pick a number, that have supported them. Well, now with the fact that, we'll have, 10,000 plus, 15,000 plus internet connections, a lot of our ministry staff is being redeployed to now be online campus support staff. And they're in the chat, they're having conversations, they're engaging with people that are online and doing prayers offline and trying to help and navigate some of these. So, I think part of what we're doing is just trying to figure out where they fit and what makes the most sense. Our children's director and her team have done a phenomenal job of creating a number of online resources for our children. So to push out to parents, whether that's not necessarily just on the weekend, but that's even during the week of, again, because now you've got all these millions of parents that are now homeschool teachers, and just trying to figure out how do you navigate that. So I think part of their job and part of what they have taken on is figuring out how can we resource them? What resources can we put together? Can we push out to websites so that our attenders can engage their children and help them grow and help them deal with all this. But so, you know, and honestly, from a conversation with employees, it has been incredibly easy just because everybody realizes we are all in this together. This is not, you know, not just a youth issue or it's not just a preaching issue. We are all in this together. And so we're going to figure out how to best support the church. And everybody has done a phenomenal job of jumping on board and helping where they can.
That's great.
Yeah, and I would totally affirm and agree with what Glenn was saying there. We've done very similar, and what we're seeing is that some people really are finding in other areas they really love too. You know, they may find a gift that they didn't recognize. We've been able to increase some volunteer engagement, use them who would typically be volunteers on Sunday mornings, reroute those. We've continued to have our team leaders that are volunteers having Zoom calls and huddles and all that on Sunday morning, just as if they were there so they can encourage and spend time together. I have yet to ask anyone about doing something that's not in their role to have anybody say, no, I can't.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has been more than willing to jump in.
That's good. That's good to hear. That's really good to hear. So let me ask you the rough question when it comes to staffing. Okay, and I want to caveat this saying this is not, you know, I'm not asking about Seacoast, I'm not asking about Rockbridge or anything like that. But there are some churches right now that are looking at their financial realities, and PPP or not, they're realizing that they need to make some tough staffing decisions and they may need to let some people go. As an executive pastor, which the three of you guys have all been, and I have as well, how do you wrestle through that? How do you think through and come to the decision that this might be the only choice that I have left? And then how do you have some of those conversations, and how do you set them up well for their next season of ministry? I know that's an unfair question. I'm sorry, but you agree to be a part of this.
I've had these conversations with some other churches that don't have the reserves and things like that. So one of the things that I've just encouraged them to really be strategic, look at their mission first. What are the essential aspects that you have to do? Can these people that you're considering furloughing or laying off, can they help support that ministry? Can they help enhance it? Can they help grow it? It goes back to that not cut today what it costs you tomorrow. So it may be somebody that you're looking at that can really help further that mission in ways you haven't thought of. I think I've also encouraged them, have conversation with key business people in your church and community, even some of your givers that have high capacity and love to give, that have that gift of giving. Talk to them before you make any decision, because we've had one or two people just say, hey, if you ever get to that point, let us know. Because they want to help. They want to help preserve those people's ministry as well. But I think you got to look at the mission, look strategically, and how can they help support the mission in the future. And then at the same time, I'm sorry, I would care for them as they're going off. One of the things that I believe the church has a responsibility is to really care for anybody if you let it go. I think it's like a fisherman who throws fish back. You spend a lot of time picking out the bait, checking the depth of the water, what's the temperature to catch the right fish. You should put that same emphasis when you then put the fish back in the water. They put it in, make sure the water's running through the gills, that it's healthy for its next person to catch. I think it's our responsibility to make sure the staff person is healthy and prepared to step into the next role.
That's really good. And that's actually one of the pivots that we've started to make here at Chemistry, knowing that it's a new reality for a lot of churches out there as far as bringing on new staff, and at the same time, maybe having to let go a staff member because of the budget concerns. And I agree with you, Daryl. I think we're still early, and churches are hoping against hope and praying really hard that, the next 8 to 12 weeks that we find ourselves kind of out of this crisis and things get back to somewhat normalcy as far as being able to gather together and also generosity wise and giving wise. But one of the things that we're doing, that we're starting, is some what we're calling transitional coaching, where we're going to come alongside churches that unfortunately have to make that, that are running tight margins and need to make those kind of staffing decisions, to do exactly what you were just saying, Daryl, kind of helping them care well for these well-loved and long-term employees that they have to either furlough or lay off at this point, kind of help them with not only helping them process and love them through that process, but also helping them with resume and interviewing skills so that they're well prepared, not only processing what just happened to them, but being able to be well prepared for their next place of ministry and kind of helping them through and helping them find that. So, and you can find that. We just put up a page this past week. It's chemistrystaffing.com/transitions. You can kind of, it's kind of a 12-week program that we're working with candidates that have been laid off and helping churches kind of love and care for them. Glenn, would love to hear your kind of thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think, again, I'm going to state the obvious, but, obviously I think it has to start with prayer. We've got to go into it prayerfully. We've got to prayerfully consider where we are, where we're going, where is the church? And, I think we also have got to be very honest with people, about where we are. Do we see this as a long-term transition? Do we see this as a short-term, furlough? And again, I think having those conversations are incredibly important, just as we try to walk through this. Now, maybe it's a position that we think that will come back in, again, we can fill in the blank, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 4 weeks, once the building opens back up. But there again, even once facilities open back up, then the question is, how quickly are people going to come back? How quickly are people, at least from a dollars and cents, from a giving standpoint, how is that going to impact? So again, I think you've got to have all those discussions on the front end of this and kind of map out a plan. And I think, from a transition standpoint about, talking about resources and helping them, I think, the church has got to do a phenomenal job, does a great job, and has to continue to do a phenomenal job of equipping people for what next is, whatever the next is, whether that be another position in the ministry, whether that be a position in the secular world. I think we've got to do a great job helping them with resumes, helping them with interview skills, because, some of these people, this may be a job that they've had for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And, how you apply for a job today is substantially different than when it was 25 years ago when I applied for the church, when Greg, took me to lunch and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about coming on staff to help us figure this whole finance thing out." And, there wasn't a formal application 25 years ago. So, I think, we've got to look at that, and we've got to make sure that we equip the staff for whatever the next is, and encourage them and help them, as well as communicate with the other staff, here's what we're doing. So that, again, what you don't want is staff to go, "Hey, here through the grapevine, well, the church just, laid off X number of people, and the church didn't talk about it internally." I think we've got to do a great job of communicating, the what's and the whys and the whens, so that we dispel the rumor. We don't create a rumor mill of, here's what's going on, because, I think we've all been in situations where, something wasn't necessarily talked about, and then the rumors take over, and there's a huge gap between the rumors and reality. And, if we're playing catch up on the back end, it just takes a whole lot more work.
Yeah. And if I could make a couple of comments too, I think one thing that I think is worth considering is, well, it'll be hard to say this, but if I'm starting a furlough process in my church, I'm starting at the top, not the bottom. Meaning, I think leaders have to be willing to serve their team. And I think it's easier to sort of just wipe out whole categories, perhaps, of staff. It's harder, but probably better, to have conversations with your staff where you say things like, "Listen, if you had to take 2 or 3 months off of getting paid, could you manage that? Do you and your family have enough financial resources to navigate that?" And because that may be the case. And let's be honest, if you've got senior professional staff on your team that are, sort of high salary folks, if they don't have financial reserves to cover a couple of months of not getting paid, they've got a stewardship problem. And that's something that we need to be thinking about going forward. Right? If you're a 50-year-old person and you can't cover your expenses for a couple of months in a crisis, you haven't been saving at the level that you probably should be. So anyway, I want to find out who those people are who can navigate that, and I want to say, okay, look, we may have to start with you because you've handled yourself well in this area, and then we'll bring you back when you can. You got young people, single moms, stressed out workers. They can't handle it. They don't make enough money to be able to cover those bills. I want to try to keep them employed as long as I can. So this is harder to do it that way, but I think it's the way the church should do it, frankly.
Patrick Lencioni has done a whole awful lot of, had a bunch of conversations about just that, about, senior leadership coming and saying, look, we're going to cut what we're taking home in order to be able to protect the rest of our team. I think there's some beauty in that. And so, I hope we didn't just offend half the people that were.
No, yeah, I hope not too. I also think that there's a possibility that some people are going to get a furlough, and that you could say to them, listen, our plan is to furlough you, but then make you whole over the next, say, 6 months, 12 months, meaning we think we're going to be able to come back. We're going to continue to manage God's money wisely and well here at our church. And if we have to furlough you for these 2 or 3 months, then over the next several months, we think we'll be able to make you whole financially. I think that's another way to approach this. You couldn't potentially do that with everybody, but with some of your staff, that might be the right approach.
And I think you're exactly right. And I think communication is going to be the key. Communication with that individual, but also communication with the staff. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan. Now, you don't have to talk about specifics. You don't have to talk about, if you're going to do some salary, reductions for some people, you don't have to get into, Bob's now making X percent of what he was. You don't have to talk about the specifics, but I think communicating the heart and communicating the goal and communicating the why helps people understand. While they may, while not everybody's going to get excited about this, they understand the why, and that helps them, support the ministry and continue to support the church as a whole.
So much of what I'm hearing you guys say, and even what we've been hearing people say over the last few webinars that we've done, and a lot of the conversations I'm having with the churches I work with, so much of this crisis is taking us back to the basics of pastoring, right? And the basics of what ministry is supposed to be, high touch pastoral care as much as you can from 6 feet away, or however far away we're supposed to be these days. Working on communication. We're the church, and pardon the crassness of this, but we are a communications organization, right? So much of what we're supposed to be doing is sharing the gospel, communicating the word. We need to get our communication house in order and be doing that, and be really clear about what we're trying to do. And just, so much of that fundamental work of pastoring is built into communication, high touch, being clear about where we're taking people, telling the stories of not just Jesus, but the work of the church as we do this. For some of the churches and the church leaders that are listening to us today, because we're coming up towards the bottom of the hour, what one thing would you just say, hey, this is where you need to be focusing your time in these next, let's say, 14 days, when it comes to leading your church and being mindful of your finances? And then I got one more question that we'll ask before we wrap this up, so don't take all the time. But what would you say to church leaders?
Well, I would say this. I'll go first, if that's okay. I think I love what you said a minute ago, Matt, that this crisis is kind of bringing us back to some of these basics, right? I heard a speaker say this weekend that disruption is often a portal to discovery. And I think what we're discovering is some of the stuff that matters and some of the stuff that doesn't matter. And so what I would say, the focus for leaders in the church needs to be giving your people hope. It's the job of the leader to give the team hope. And people, when there's a crisis, a staff team, a congregation, what they really want to know is, you know what? I don't know what the answers are, but it sure looks like our leadership team is on top of this. It sure looks like they're working the plan and they've got it figured out. Now, that they get that because you've been communicating that to them. So if I were trying to focus on something over the next 2 weeks, I would be focusing on extroverting to my staff and to my congregation that while we don't have all the answers, we really are working this. We're on top of it. We've got smart people thinking about it. We're on our knees praying about it. It's the job of the leader to give the team hope. And I think if we can give our people hope, we can navigate through this.
Yeah.
That's great. That's
I
great.
think one piece is in this crisis, the church is in this week certainly caring for people, whether it be making phone calls, going back to some of the basics that you were speaking. But they also need to be thinking about tomorrow over yesterday. There's many churches in this crisis right now thinking, well, we will be able to get back. And I think we all have to be thinking over these next weeks, well, what if we never met again publicly? How would we do ministry? So asking ourselves some tough questions during this week and not getting caught up as, hey, it's 2 more weeks, we'll be able to get back to normal. Oh, month, we'll be able to, it just kind of continues on. And then all of a sudden, you're not conveying hope. You're holding on to what was.
It's good.
Yeah, I think those are both phenomenal ideas. I think they're great, and I think one of the things that I would say is we as leaders need to, be talking about hope, but we also need to be creative in terms of how we're going about it. I've had this conversation with a number of people over the last 4 months, or the last probably 3 or 4 weeks, is that I think probably there has been more creativity in the church in the last 4 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever time frame than the last 10 years put together, because people have been forced to embrace a new reality. And so I think something that we also as leaders need to say, we need to be open to new ideas. We need to be looking at things. How can we do things differently? And even once those buildings do open back up, how are we going to do things differently? How are we going to engage people? How are we going to, like right now, I just got a text from my small group leader that said, hey, here's the link to our small group tonight. Well, great. So once this is, that we're on the backside of this pandemic and buildings are open, are we still going to continue to do small groups in person? Are we going to continue doing them online? Are we going to, how are we going to do ministry? And I think we as leaders have got to be open to doing things differently than we have done them in the past. Because I think this is the new reality that we have, is that things, Daryl, as you said, are never going to go back to normal. We define, however you want to define normal, but we've got to figure out how are we going to do things going forward, and embracing technology and figuring out how to do things differently than we have in the past.
That's fantastic. You guys actually took my follow-up question, so I don't have anything. That was my question. It's like, what's next? Where are we headed next? And I think you guys really, really kind of nailed it. And I think, Glenn, you really set up well, and we didn't have a conversation about this. You really set up well the conversation that we're going to be having next week, next Thursday at 11 Eastern. Just talking about what does this season look like next? What does church look like in the intermediate term? We kind of survived where we're using blizzard, winter, and ice age language. We've survived the blizzard. We've made it through the storm. There's still effects, but now we're moving into winter. What does that intermediate term look like for us? And then what does the long term look like? And so we'll have Scott Rideout, who is the president of Converge, joining us. We'll have Tim Farrant, who's the executive pastor at Grace Fellowship Church up in the Columbus area. And then we'll also be joined by Tim Nations on our team to talk a little bit about that. And if you are watching this on Facebook Live or haven't registered yet, you can go to chemistrystaffing.com/virtual to sign up for that. Guys, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us, to share your wisdom with us. Where can we be pointing people to find out more about what you're doing or how you're helping churches through this season?
Well, I could recommend if people are looking for resources, we've got a whole bunch of free downloadable resources at generis.com, GENERIS.com. We're even offering free coaching appointments for churches or church teams that just want to process through, hey, how do we navigate these kind of weird days that we're in right now? So all that's available from our website, generis.com. Happy to serve people that way if that helps.
And we'll share that with people when we send out the recording link after this. So,
Matt, one of the things that I think Seacoast has done over the years, and that our senior pastor, our founding pastor, Greg Surratt, has encouraged us to do, is to try and share what's going on within the church. And I think Seacoast continues to share. And if you call us and go, what are you doing? We'll share the good, the bad, and we'll share a lot of the ugly. We'll share about, you know what, we thought this was going to be a phenomenal idea, and we put a whole bunch of resources, and buddy, it fell flat on its face, and here's why we felt it fell. Just so that maybe you don't make the same mistake that we do, or maybe you can take what we did and make it better. And so, we've got a bunch of resources. Matt, I'll send you a link to it. I've just stuck them in a Dropbox. Just it's everything from how to work remotely as a team. Our technology guys, our IT team has done some great things along that line, and posting on social media. It's just a variety of documents. Again, not saying that we do them all right, but this just happens to be how we're doing them at this point in time. And if they can help you, great. And if they don't, then you know what? Chalk it up to a bad burrito that we ate right before we wrote it, and we'll move on down the road.
That's great. Thank you. And again, we'll link to all that in the email that follows this out. So, Daryl, how can we track you down?
Yeah, and for me, you could just email me at daryl@rockbridge.cc, or if you just want to set up a time to talk. I've been doing that with a lot of churches here lately, church leaders, just setting up just a 30-minute coaching call to talk through and listen and bounce ideas off. You can do that through the Chemistry Staffing website there. You can find me on that, or daryl.rowland@chemistrystaffing.com.
That sounds great. Well, thanks again, guys. I really, really appreciate you all taking the time to sit in and share your wisdom with our crowd. Really appreciate what you guys are doing. We'll push out all those resources that you mentioned to everybody. Probably later this afternoon after the video finishes rendering. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a great day.
See you later.